So basically what I do is I create courses, case studies, and I do consulting to help businesses use behavioral science and psychology in their customer experience. Starbucks had really poor sort of customer experience feedback when they got new espresso makers that were too tall to see the baristas. So they'd be back there making a coffee and these nice new fancy machines, and they spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars replacing these espresso machines because they were too tall. And you couldn't see someone making your coffee and like having a little chat with you and sort of looking behind the curtain of, well, what is this? What am I paying for? So you lost a little bit of like the reason you paying like $5 or $6 for a cup of coffee. You could really just like go to McDonald's and get one for $1. So Disneyland worked with Kodak to design the colors in the park so that when you took pictures and you were in the park, you were like, wow, it's like really bright in here. It's like a little different. But when you developed the pictures, it was vibrant. It was exciting. It looked good in photos. And it still looked good in real life, but it looked really good in photos. And that was a great example of, I think a brand really understanding where the end of their experience was and the memories that they wanted to engender with their customers to get them to come back.
What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
I would say, don't worry, you'll have a real job eventually. I was a musician for a long time.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Jasravi, Conversations at the Edge with thought leaders from the branding, marketing, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas with rough and sharp edges. Hi, Jennifer. So nice to have you on my show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. If I requested you to tweet your profile, what would you say?
Gosh, this to me is like always the hardest question because it requires me to be concise, which is really hard. So basically what I do is I create courses, case studies, and I do consulting to help businesses use behavioral science and psychology in their customer experience.
Okay, and we'll come back to your book towards the end. But we will start from it as well. And if I quote from your book, Jen, the new paradigm of human decision-making is that everyone is irrational. People don't know what actually motivates them, and everyone uses mental shortcuts. Could you elaborate on this first before we get to how behavioral science is a great tool to help us think through it? Why do you say everyone is irrational? Are you referring to the subconscious part of a human being, the beliefs and the assumptions? Is that so? And when you say the brain is taking mental shortcuts, are you referring to Daniel Kahneman's fast system of thinking so that the brain is avoiding cognitive overload and taking, has developed all these biases? Could you please elaborate on this context and then tell us why behavioral science is really picking up so much?
Yeah, well, I think you said it really well. So basically, I call those three sort of principles the thing every marketer or customer experience professional needs to know about how people think. And it is based on sort of the behavioral science fundamentals, partly from Thinking Fast and Slow, partly from books like Predictably Irrational, which is where the irrational part comes from. But I think it's really getting across to people who, like myself, for many years, were used to doing customer research in a way where you go and talk to a customer and then kind of having this break between, well, they said they were going to do this, but they did something different. And I don't really understand why they did that. And then you go back to the customer and start asking them. But as you can see from those three principles, it's like they don't always know. In fact, most of the time, we don't really know why we're making the decisions that we are. And I think the example I always like to bring up is, way back in grad school, doing advertising focus groups, and you're talking to folks, and we're talking to someone about like a fast food brand. Well, we'll keep them anonymous, even though I wasn't working for them at the time or anything. But basically talking to moms and saying, hey, you have this kids meal. We'll call it like the enjoyment meal for kids, right? And you would ask the moms like, okay, well, why are you feeding your kids, 3, 4, 5 years old, this particular enjoyment meal. And they would say things like, because they would look around at all the other moms, you could sort of see them like calculating in their brain, like, oh God, if I say it was because my kid threw a fit, or because it was like the closest restaurant, or, I was just really having a hard day and I thought that they would like it, I might get judged. I might sit in front of this group of moms and they might go, well, like, oh, is she really a good mom if she just kind of fed her kid fast food? And so you would see them kind of do like this mental calculus. And then inevitably they would say something like, well, I just feel like they've really improved like the health credentials of their food and all of this kind of stuff, which, while it was true, probably wasn't the real reason why they had, gone to this fast food place and given their kids something that was really like expedient and easy and convenient, rather than necessarily like the best choice, because the best choice would have required them to like go out of their way or persuade the kid to eat something they didn't want to eat. I mean, and that was really where I got a little bit of a lightning bolt. And, coming out of, I've gone through two schools now, two graduate schools in business, one very focused on like creative advertising, so creative brand management, and the other like very MBA focused, like consumer psychology, marketing analytics, things like this, where you're looking more at what people are doing rather than what they're saying. And really, to me, I don't think that one is right and one is wrong. I think they each have their place. I think they can work together. But the problem comes in when you start saying, well, I don't understand. Are customers lying to me? Like, why are they saying one thing and doing another? So that's where those three principles come from. It's really, I think for a lot of people, a little bit of a revelation that's like, oh yeah, well, people maybe don't know why they're making a decision, or they're not acting like they should be acting. Why are they doing that? And that's where behavioral science and, to a certain extent, psychology kind of comes into play.
Yeah, so nicely, explained. And I mean, you can be judged on anything, but you cannot allow judgment on what kind of a mother you are, because, that's there's no school that prepares you for it. And there is, everybody has just their role model, their own mother, a positive or a negative role model. I'm going to be like that, or I'm not going to be like that. So it's not just an armpit is looking for a DO, it's how that human being is making decisions in life. Isn't that amazing? And isn't that so huge and complex?
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it kind of goes back to, I think the second or the third principle there, the order changes all the time, but the bit about cognitive filters and like this idea that, I like to use the metaphor of like coffee and water going through a literal coffee filter. It's like you have different things, different ingredients, but when they come together and go through that, cognitive filter or the cognitive biases, in your mind, they can come out as something completely different, because, you can see it everywhere now with, things like confirmation bias and sort of social media bubbles and things. It's, people pay attention to the things that confirm what they already believe. So confirmation bias,
yes,
right? Which I think we see even more and more now. And then it's compounded by things like, algorithms that, where I like this thing that I already believe in. So it's going to give me more of what I already believe in. So it must be right because I'm seeing more and more of it. So, these kind of things they're very complex. It's not, the one thing I do like to say about behavioral science is, two things. Like, first, I'm not a behavioral scientist. I use behavioral science. I'm an applied, user of behavioral science, but I'm not like in a laboratory, I'm not in academia. I'm not kind of doing, the research. I'm there sort of translating the research from, an academic environment into a practical environment. And, sometimes the research will say one thing and you'll put it into an experiment and you'll put it in front of your customers and it doesn't work, or it works, but it works in a different way than you thought it might. So, there's that bit. And then I think the second thing to bear in mind is, because behavioral science is becoming very popular in marketing and user experience and product design, people are starting to kind of sell it as a silver bullet, which is not the case. Like, it's a tool in your toolbox. It is a very helpful tool. I think it's a great way to sort of have that paradigm shift about how you think about things like user research or, customer research, or why customers are doing what they're doing. But it's not some magical thing that it cracks open every mystery of how customers work. You know what I mean? You still have to put things in front of people and figure out, how are they responding, with all the different pressures that they have contextually, like in their environment, their social, groups, all sorts of things kind of come into play.
Yeah. Absolutely. But just this whole chapter opening, that how the brain functions, let's understand that as a very important parameter, and then go about deciding what messages we are going to send to the consumer. So in that context, Jen, uh, if we apply behavioral science to the customer experience, you know how does it translate in terms of the entire customer journey? And would you like to define for our audiences what is it, what you mean when you say customer experience, first of
Oh, yes. A lot of things to
all?
unpack,
Yeah,
because they do like to say customer experience, and people are like, well, I think customer experience is only digital, and I think it's this, and I think it's that. So
yeah,
maybe a good one to level set.
yeah.
So I like to use customer experience really as a kind of a broad descriptor. So in my work in customer experience, I've done everything from like retail stores to digital retail stores to purely digital channels to mobile apps to connected car to all sorts of things. So to me, customer experience is literally as simple as saying it's when the customer is interacting with your business. That's it. It doesn't matter where, it doesn't matter how. And a lot of the challenges in customer experience are things like consistent messaging, because in the real world, when you are designing a customer experience, if you are someone, and I've been client side and agency side, so when you're sort of client side, you're client side marketer, you are the steward for the brand, and you need someone to have a consistent experience. And I think it happens because we're all people. You've got one agency working on digital, and you've got one agency working on retail, or maybe you've got different parts of one big agency kind of working on stuff, and sometimes the right hand doesn't really know what the left hand is doing, and the right hand is competing with the left hand sometimes for like billable hours and things like that. So your job then as the client, as the marketer, is to be able to look at everything in a holistic way, right? To say, okay, well, if we're saying this in the digital channel, what happens when the customer like gets to, let's say, it's a bank, they get in branch, are we saying completely different things in branch? And what we're saying in the branch, is that like counteracting, or is it going against what we're saying in digital channels? Are we having a great digital experience and like a crap in-person experience, or vice versa? So really, to me, customer experience is a good way to say kind of anything, right? So rather than saying like marketing and product design and UX and like marketing communications and pricing and product, it's a good way to kind of pull it all into one phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jen, before we go into, you've talked at great length, exhaustively, about how messages will differ at different,
Yes.
points of the customer journey. Before that, I'd like to share something which struck me, when I was going through it. I was doing consulting work for a major cosmetic brand, Lakme in India, which also has salon chain across the country, like really penetrated. And we had to define a customer journey for it. And a lot of things that you had said, were so stark for me, in the sense that uh, so many aspects of a customer journey are taken for granted or not really understood, and they decide whether the customer is going to walk in again. Just so um, the whole part of managing emotions across the customer journey, and where does it really end, and how it is going to be for a different personality, or what kind of service they have come for. Is it hair, is it skin, is it regular maintenance, is it a special occasion? And if they've tried a signature service, when they are leaving, does it end when the service is over? Does it end at the reception? When they have some niggling doubt, and they're being able to clear it out or not? Does it end when they take a selfie and put it on social media? Or does it end when they've gone out and are interacting with their people in the social function that they have adorned themselves for? So many aspects. So the peak end is something that we will take up again with you, because that was really, really revelatory, and I have specific examples for you that I want you to elaborate on. But just this customer journey and how messages need to vary across different points. Could you please elaborate on that first?
Sure. Yeah. So I might just talk quickly about peak end, just so that everybody, all the listeners, are on the same page in case they're not familiar. So there is a principle in behavioral science, behavioral economics, called the peak end rule. And basically what it says is that when people develop like an opinion or a memory of an experience, it is not based on the average of every moment. So if you had, some good, some bad, it doesn't all even out to just like average, right? There's some points in the journey that will punch above their weight. And so that's this idea of peak end rules. Some of the research came from basically it was Daniel Kahneman and his research team looking at colonoscopy patients, which I've never had a colonoscopy, but for reading from it, it sounds like it's a painful experience. And so basically what they did is they measured how painful it was and when it was painful. And then they asked people, how painful was it? And basically they found, in quickly in summary, this idea that it wasn't the average of pain that sort of gave them that pain opinion. It was how high the peak was and what the ending amount of pain was. So that's kind of where this has all come from. And it's a nice one for customer experience, I think, for a lot of the reasons that you've mentioned. I like to use it as sort of like a golden rule of customer experience in behavioral science for a few reasons. I think first, to your point, like it really gets us to think critically about like what are those moments that punch above their weight? Where should we be putting our time and attention? Because too often you work with a big company, it could be the biggest company with the biggest checkbook, and they're still going to tell you do it in half as much time with half as much money. You know what I mean? Whether you're on the client side or you're on the consulting agency side. So you have to prioritize and you have to start to figure out like, is it really worth us, spending a lot of time and attention someplace where customers aren't really having that emotional experience? It's something that's nice to have, but in reality, you have to make trade-offs. So a lot of times I will use peak end in that way to say like, okay, let's really look and understand how, different customers are having different experiences. So you might have multiple ends and multiple peaks. The good example I like to give is of IKEA. So if you go to IKEA and, you're shopping through this big warehouse, you're doing the whole thing, it's exhausting. And, maybe have a fight with your significant other about what, color couch to get. And then you get to the end and it's like, oh God, there's this huge receipt and you spent twice as much as you thought you were. That is an example of a peak and an end. I had a fight and I spent too much money. So IKEA wasn't that great, but there are other peaks and ends in IKEA, right? So I always ask folks, like when I give talks and things, like, okay, well, do you think that getting the receipt is the actual end of the experience? And people say, well, yeah, I mean, you got the receipt. And I say, well, no. What is the most stressful part about getting IKEA furniture? Assembling IKEA furniture. So that's actually something that is more of an end. It's not to say that getting receipt is not an end. It's the end to the store experience. And if you get a bunch of stuff that you don't have to put together, that is the end, full stop. You put your cute little plants on the shelf. Great. I had a great time at IKEA. You take the couch home to assemble it, have another fight with your significant other about how to put this couch together. That is the end. So if you look at the way IKEA has designed their experience, I can't say for sure that they know about peak end, but they're very smart and they experiment quite a bit. So if you'll notice, they usually have a cafe next to the checkouts. So it's like a nice smell. It smells like donuts. It has little sweet treats. It's not a full restaurant. You know what I mean? It's just something you can get like, oh, I'm really stressed out. I need like a soda. Let me get an ice cream cone, something to kind of make me feel better. So that is there. It's, I believe strategically placed. And then if you look at things like the very end, when they get home and they're assembling everything. So IKEA actually acquired a company called TaskRabbit. So TaskRabbit now can come to your home and put together all the furniture. So all of a sudden you've got these key moments where these were, high stress sort of points where people were, unconsciously sort of creating this idea in their head that, oh, I hate IKEA. I hate going to IKEA. It's such a faff. It takes forever. Oh my God, I just don't want to go. To, okay, well, it's more manageable now because they've sort of softened the peaks and the ends. And it's not to say that, like every brand is going to have moments in the experience where you may have to do something you don't want to do. You know what I mean? You have to start, like you have to register for an account at a bank. Like there are very few ways that you can make that a more pleasurable experience. There's some. You can have like fun animations, you can gamify it, you can do lots of things. But at the end of the day, I have to sit there for 20, 30 minutes and give you all this information that I may not have, like doing your taxes. Like doing your taxes is never going to be fun. But you can soften the blow or design the experience in such a way that, it is making that a better experience than your competitors, or it is making it an experience that is a better experience with your brand. Therefore, I'm going to choose your brand. So peak end rule is one of those. Again, you can use it in a lot of different ways, but it's a good, and this, sorry, I wouldn't take us down a rabbit hole, but I also talk about customer journey mapping. And to me, the real key part of a customer journey map is that emotional journey. And that's one of the tools that we have is sort of established in design thinking and user research and all of that, that we can use in behavioral science to help us identify things like peaks and ends. And then once you have, the customer journey, it's like, oh, okay, I understand this. I understand this tends to be a frustrating moment in the experience for this type of customer getting this type of product. And this tends to be where their end is. So if we're going to, say this is a key customer for us, we need to make sure that those two parts are really good as much as they can be.
Right. Awesome. And even when you were talking about a retail chain, when you're talking about mapping messages across the consumer journey, and you were talking about where would you build aspiration and where would you build an urgency to purchase. So would you like to take an example in terms of how messages will vary across the consumer journey A? Also, I loved the examples that you had taken about Lululemon and Disney in terms of the peak end. If you'd like to take an example there also for our audiences to really get comfortable with the principles.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting one. So like if think about like I think we can go back to like a retail store, like a fast food restaurant or whatever it might be. You have moments in that experience where you're not you're getting exposed to different decisions that you could make. So if you think about going into like a Pret, for example, or a McDonald's, I try to pick some things that are sort of universal, Burger King, like big global companies. So you're kind of going into the store and you're not making a decision yet. Some people go in with sort of their habit, their habitual stuff. They're like, oh, I get a Big Mac every time. Okay, let's go in and get a Big Mac again. And nothing you show me is going to steer me from my goal of getting a Big Mac. I had a craving and here I am. Okay. But then there's another portion of customers who are coming in and they're like, it was here, it was convenient. I don't really know what I want. It's been a long time since I've been in, this Burger King or whatever it might be. And you see marketing messages everywhere. It could be like an Adidas store, like whatever it is. You see different products, you see different messages, you see a lot of information. And as we know, going back to the three ways that, or the three things we need to know about how people think, we're kind of lazy thinkers. Like we don't want to take in too much information. It's very like the cognitive load stuff. So cognitive load just being like how much of your working memory is getting taken up by information. It's very limited. So if you try to shove, 15 products and tell me everything that's new and interesting about this product while I'm in the store, it's not going to affect me. And more often than not, customers will just tune out stuff. So if they see too much information, if they see a poster with 15 things on it, they're like, forget it. I'll just figure it out when I get there. But this is an opportunity. And I use sort of a broad term, this term of priming, right? So I think when it comes to behavioral science and the research, some of the priming stuff has had some, replication issues and stuff like that. But it seems, and as far as I can tell, and certainly in my experience, the fundamentals of priming, this idea of like, you're exposing me to something, you should be exposing me to something that is a very single-minded message, something that's very visual, something that's very salient, and that will affect what I choose later. That in its broadest terms, I found to be very effective. I don't want to get into an argument about, not that we would, but get into an argument about like, oh, well, this priming thing didn't get replicated. Okay, yeah. But the principle itself seems to work in my experience very well. So let's say, you're going through this first part of the experience. It's like the lobby, or you're shopping around and looking at different products. You're sort of unconsciously collecting information and you're starting to evaluate things. You're starting to think about how you feel in this environment, how you feel about, or if, a particular product, if it's a food product or clothing or whatever it might be, is it appealing to me? I touch it. Is it soft? Like when I see the poster, does like, the burger or the fries or whatever, do they jump out? Do they look delicious? And so all of this input is sort of priming us to then make a decision once we get to a decision point. And, in something as simple as, let's use a McDonald's or Burger King as an example, I get to the counter to make a decision, or I get to the kiosk and I literally have to make a decision. If you look at something that's a little bit more complicated, like let's say, I don't know, an Adidas or a Nike store, I go in, I could whip out my phone at any time and make an order. I could order this thing that I'm looking at. I can just scan it and I can go in the e-commerce store and I could just have it shipped right to my house. So it gets a little bit more complicated, but in its simplest terms, once you get to a decision point, that's where you have to start thinking about things like nudging, like defaults. the choice architecture, so how you're presenting a choice to customers.
Mm.
And I think a lot of brands, when they think of behavioral science, think of that moment. They think, oh, well, it's just nudging, right? It's just like, like, what default am I putting here? Is it a particular brand of soda, or is it a particular size? And that's going to affect how people choose. And that is true. Like, it does have a lot to do with how people decide how they choose. But there's the 80% of the experience that they go through, I think, before and after they make that decision, that really impacts things like emotion and memory, which, as we know from all the brand research and the Byron Sharp stuff, that's how people learn to prefer your brand. That's how people learn to say, like, oh, I'm an Apple person, not a Mac person. It's not because of the way Apple has designed their choice architecture that makes them say that. And, to me, I think if that's where we're focusing behavioral science as an industry, I think we're missing a huge trick, because you start to think of all the other things. So things like visual salience. So the way that I like to think about visual salience is it's basically just saying, if I look at a poster, what jumps out at me? Is it too much information or just enough information? Is it focused? Do I understand it? And, we can go back to sort of the choice framework that I put together for customer experience, but there's one about being clear. Is it a clear, noticeable message? Is it consistent? Are you saying basically the same thing to me over and over and over? Because that's how many times it takes me to understand it, to pay attention to it, all this stuff. So something is visually salient, it's very visually driven, and we have like salience AIs and things, like some of which I use, but we can roll creative through and say, like, oh, okay, people are really noticing the logo. Is that good? Is that what we want them to see? Or do we want them to, like, look down here and say, oh, this shirt looks really soft, or, here's a football player, like, wearing, the particular pair of boots or cleats that are what we want to sell. So these are all like decisions you have to make from a marketing perspective. But again, I think this is where looking at behavioral science in a holistic way, and part of the reason why I created, the choice framework, was to help address this, to kind of get people out of the mindset of, let's just nudge, which isn't terrible. And I think, it can be very effective and all of that. But again, like, as a marketer or as a customer experience professional or a product designer, you're not just dealing with those moments of decision. So that's when I was trying to write the book, to kind of get people thinking, like, outside of the menu, or outside of the app, like, kind of going through the checkout process.
Jen, why don't you share about the choice framework?
Yes. So choice framework, again, is a holistic way I like to kind of think about, customer experiences. You can use it as a checklist. You can use it to audit an experience. And, I'm sorry, I got distracted because I remember you asked me about Disney. We'll go back to Disney with the pigs in the end, because I love that story from the book. I really like it. When I found it, I was like, oh, this is great. I don't want to miss it. So basically, choice is, let me see if I can spell it.
No worries. I'll take you there again. We'll go to Disney together. Yeah.
Yes. I love that story. So it just spells choice, easy enough, right? So it's clear. Let's see if I can spell choice in my head. Holistic, open. Okay. I, individual. C, contextual. And E, emotional. And E, sadly, is the last one, but I think it's one of the most important ones. So I just going to talk a minute about each one of those. So clear, we just talked about, right? So do I understand it? Do I get it? Are you kind of nailing home the same message, like, over and over? Because we know that it takes a while for people to kind of get things in their head, and having very single-minded messaging and very single-minded creative and touch points and all of that is really important from a brand perspective, and also from a communications and conversion perspective. Like, tell me the same thing like 15 times. Yeah. Maybe tell me 15 different ways, but probably not. So that's clear. So H, holistic, this is where we talk about things like peak end. I think the other thing to think about, okay, here we go. So confirmation bias. This is where we'll talk about Disney, because again, I love the story. So thinking about, what happens before you purchase, or before a customer is purchasing. So that's sort of like priming time, and what's happening afterwards. And I like to use, and again, I think there's a lot of principles you could probably pull in here, but I use confirmation bias because most people know what confirmation bias is. And that's this idea of, like, okay, well, I believe something, I took a risk, I bought this product, and I don't really want to pay attention to any information that isn't going to say this was a great decision. So the example I always like to give is like buying a car. Okay. If you go in and you've always wanted like a red Corvette, and you go into the Corvette dealership, and you buy red, and you're like, oh, I'm so happy with my purchase. It was really expensive, but I'm retired. I've been waiting my whole life to buy this Corvette. And as you roll off the kind of the tarmac or whatever, we roll off the road, and they're waving goodbye. The guy says, well, I'm really surprised you picked red because blue is our most popular color. You frowny face, like that's a bad experience now. Now you've made me feel bad about this decision I just made. So it could be the same thing, with food. It could be making sure that you're reinforcing a healthy choice. Like, oh yeah, did you know that this food you just ate is like fair trade and it's organic and here's all the cool stuff that you need to know about it while you're eating it to make it feel like, I made a really great choice here. And yeah, the experience I always like to pull up is this one from Disneyland, like in the 60s. So this is way before really behavioral science is like in people's brains, but obviously like Disneyland at the time, not Disney World yet. Disneyland, very, very smart. And I've written a couple articles about how they kind of created their experience, or they crafted the experience, the Imagineers and sort of Walt Disney kind of coming together and knowing what works, but maybe not why. And one of the things they did is they worked with Kodak. So Kodak back in the 60s, it's just regular film. And the reason that they work with Kodak is because they realized that the end of their experience wasn't actually when people left the park. Okay, like, oh yeah, we had a great day. I'm really hot. No, you're hot and sweaty and the kids are screaming. Of like, you don't want to leave that there. The actual end of this experience is when people went to, in the olden days, got their film developed and looked at the pictures. So Disneyland worked with Kodak to design the colors in the park so that when you took pictures and you were in the park, you were like, oh, wow, it's like really bright in here. It's like a little different. But when you developed the pictures, it was vibrant. It was exciting. It looked good in photos. And it still looked good in real life, but it looked really good in photos. And that was a great example of, I think a brand really understanding where the end of their experience was and the memories that they wanted to engender with their customers to get them to come back, and being like so brilliant about it. And just like a little thing like that, because that's a lot of work to go to Kodak and say, listen, this is what we want to do and partner together. I think is like an incredible amount of work. But if you think about the results and the reason that they did it, it makes total sense, because that's what Disney's all about. It's like magical experience way back in the 60s. So that's holistic. And then where are we? C.H.O. Learn how to spell choice. Is open. So this is a few different things. I think operational transparency being one of them. So this idea that, like Starbucks is a good example. It's a very good global example, right? Starbucks had really poor sort of customer experience feedback when they got new espresso makers that were too tall to see the baristas. So they'd be back there making a coffee and these nice new fancy machines. And they spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars replacing these espresso machines because they were too tall. And you couldn't see someone making your coffee and like having a little chat with you and sort of looking behind the curtain of, well, what is this? What am I paying for? So you lost a little bit of like the reason you paying like $5 or $6 for a cup of coffee. You could really just like go to McDonald's and get one for $1 or a gas station or whatever it might be. Yep. And it was such an impact on the customer experience that I think it was Howard Schultz at the time just said, no, we got to rip them out. We need shorter espresso makers or else we lose what makes us special. So operational transparency is one of those. I think there's a few, but basically like to summarize open, it's like show your work, like make it clear what the value is that you're getting in exchange for what you're paying for. So like if you're a luxury brand, I think this really applies. If I'm going to pay, I was just doing research on Birkin bags. I don't know if you're familiar with Birkin bags. I had to look up the cost of a Birkin bag for a podcast I was putting together. And the first one I found on Farfetch, which is like a used vintage, like luxury brand, was $350,000. I couldn't believe it because they're collectible. And I thought, if I'm going to shell out, listen, I'm not going to shell out more than like $100 on a purse. You better like teach me, show me, like, why is this worth what it's worth?
Yeah.
And, to a certain extent, something like a Birkin bag is like, well, you want it because you can get it, right? But on the other side, it's like, well, if I'm going to buy something like, I don't know, like a Bugatti or like an expensive car, I want to see you, I want to at least be able to go and like go to the showroom and pick out the colors and watch you put it together. Like, I want to see like what the value exchange is here. And the more you show that to me, the more emotionally invested I am in it, the more I feel like, going back to confirmation bias, I made a good decision. I didn't just shell out a bunch of money because to show other people I could, even though that certainly like plays into it, doesn't it?
Yep. In today's
Yes.
times, value, it would add to the value I associate with it. Yes. We are at I now. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing I would say about the open bit as well is sustainability, things like that. Like customers care more and more about it. So, make it available. But yes, so I is individual, so personalized. So things like cocktail party effect, which basically say like we pay attention to our names, we like things that are personalized for us. I mean, that's something that you could take at face value and say like, oh, I just need to write an email that has someone's first name in it. And to be honest, like that can be really hard. But then if you look at something like Netflix, where people like to complain about the personalization on Netflix, but regardless of how you feel about it, I think technically it is one of the best personalization engines like that exists, right? Or at least the one that we can kind of point to, them and maybe like Spotify and a handful of other folks. And this idea that like they're showing me things because I saw something else, it's personalized for me because I watched it, I showed you what I like, and you're throwing back the best that you got in terms of what else you think I might like. And actually that recommendation engine drives, like, I think it's like 86% of all the content that's watched on Netflix, because you really don't want to like dig through everything. And people are not very self-directed when it comes to that stuff. Now, I think we're so used to being served like Amazon. You go on Amazon, other people like you also enjoyed this. Well, I mean, I think McKinsey did a study. God, it was way back in like 2013 or 2014. So I'm sure it's much more than this now. But I think they said 35% of all Amazon sales were driven by that recommendation algorithm. So it just goes back to, like we're lazy. Our brains don't want to work that hard. We want things that you've picked out for us. And even if that's not true, we kind of want that illusion. I'd say the second part of that is self-reference effect, which kind of goes back to like inclusion in marketing and like actually showing people that look like them, or people like real customers that use these products. We don't always want to look at some kind of like, spit, shine, polish, like stock photo version of what you think your customer is. Just like, show your real customer, show like real stories, like make sure that you're showing that your brand is for people like you or people like me. Make your customer feel like that. So that is I.
Yeah, if hyper personalization, I mean, even retail outlets are doing so much of it. And I think we really like it. Consumers really find that adds value and makes things more convenient. I mean, whether it's styling tips, this would go well with this. I mean, or it's all of that. And it's actually beneficial for the marketer as well. But it's very beneficial for the consumer as well, provided it stays, like you said, true to the values and not gimmicky, because in the long run,
And the other thing I would say is like it really rolls into the sort of open bit. So if you're going to personalize something or you're going to serve me something, like tell me why you gave this to me. Like other people like you bought. Okay, well, what does like me mean? Does it mean that they just bought the thing that I bought? Does it mean that they're like an American living in England? Like, what does that mean? I don't know. What does like me mean? Or, with Netflix, I think they're pretty good about, you like this particular actor, so we're going to show you more about that actor. But when it comes to personalization, I think transparency and being upfront with why you're getting what you're getting is really key to sort of avoid that, ooh, this is creepy. How did you know that I thought I would like this? You know what I mean? The creep factor is definitely something you have to think about in personalization.
Yes.
So C.H.O.I.C.E. Yes, so contextual. Yes. So contextual is, we went back, we were talking about it earlier. So the environment that surrounds you, the social pressures, social norms, like, this also goes to like framing. So the context in which you show me a choice, how are you talking about this? Are you talking about this as a potential gain for me or a potential loss? So if you think about like fat-free yogurt, fat-free yogurt, let's say it's like, oh, this is 95% fat-free. Okay, that's great if you're trying to reach a customer that's looking for fat-free. But what if you've got someone who's like on the keto diet and they want fat? Well, then all of a sudden, are you going to make this 5% fat? It's the same exact amount of fat, but it's how you framed it that will really change how your customer views it and how they evaluate. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? If you ask someone if 95% fat-free yogurt is good for them, they'd probably say yes. If you ask them if 5% fat yogurt is good for them, they'd probably say, no, that feels like a lot of fat. It's the same exact amount. So this is where contextual, like, there's a few different rabbit holes you can kind of go down, but basically thinking about how you're framing the choice, how you're talking about the choice, the different behavioral science mechanics you're using to kind of, tell customers your message and how that sort of affects what they think of it. And then also things like social pressure, social norms, how is that all social proof? How does it all de-risk this decision that I'm about to make? Because I would say that's one of the big takeaways from the book is when a customer makes a decision, it is a risk. So you have to help them. You have to arm them with information. You have to make them feel like this is something that was made for them, that they've made the right decision, that other people like them, liked whatever this might be. So you can use quotes, you can use numbers, you can use star ratings. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but that's contextual kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah. And context, like you started with context, Jen, when you were saying that what bias is working, what shortcut is working is going to depend on the context. So that is how huge this is. And that is how deep you will need to understand the human being and not just the consumer part of that human being, not just their relationship with a certain category. It's them as a person, perhaps.
Yeah. And it's a good one, isn't it? Because like different things will work for different people, do you know what I mean? In different industries and different products. Like I just pull an example out of nowhere. So we'll bring the Birkin bag back. Like no amount of customer quotes that say this is the best bag I've ever bought is going to make me buy a $300,000 bag. It's just like A, not possible, and B, even if I had the money, I'd be like, this is crazy. What are you thinking? That's just me. You know what I mean? Like having them, it's got a 5-star review, but it costs $300,000. Like some things just don't work for some context, for some environments, and for some markets. And this is where I think, the big takeaway for using behavioral science in any kind of customer experience, marketing, product design, whatever it might be, is you have to test things with customers in your context with your customers. Because I would say of all like the years of using behavioral science or psychology or whatever it might be in customer experience, I am always surprised. I'm continuously surprised. I think for sure, this is the one that's really going to get everybody. And then it's like the complete opposite. And you just don't know until you put things out in front of people. So that's where, again, like context, to your point, becomes really, really key in making sure that you don't have sort of a backfire effect, right? I put this out and everyone
I like this.
That's not good.
The B effect. Yay.
Yes.
That's nice. Okay.
Totally.
Okay. So we are at E now, Jen.
E, yes, emotional. I feel like we have hit on this quite a bit, but this is the one where I feel like, I put a meme up the other day. I created a meme about behavioral science because I'm like a nerd, but and it was like I don't know if you've ever seen like the Ben Affleck one where he's like smoking and just looks really depressed. And it's like, when everyone when I have to tell everybody that behavioral science is just not, is more than just nudging again. And like so many people loved that meme because it's what it feels like. It's like, you nudge, well, kind of. Yeah. But like, there's other things that we do. And I think, as marketers, as customer experience folks, as product designers, we know that emotion is really critical. It's how people make decisions. It's the old like metaphor of the elephant and the rider, right? Like our logical brain is the rider, but our emotions are the elephant. And when that elephant gets something in its head, the rider can just hang on for dear life because they're not going to do anything to change that elephant's mind. Like emotion is driving everything. And so it's one thing that I really wanted to pull through in the book is how behavioral science can help, like, I don't want to say like, it's not, I think I get in trouble a little bit here because people think I'm saying we should manipulate customers, which is not the case at all. Yes. Everything we do, we've got to make sure it's ethical. We've got to abide by those codes of ethics, our personal codes of ethics. And I think obviously like the standards of the industry and just like humankind. But, it's this idea that you can do things like soften the blow of a bad part of the experience or a boring part of the experience, or you can heighten the joys of something that's really fun, or even just look at something as small as the example I like to give is there's an email service provider called MailChimp who they have like this little, like his name's Freddie. He's like their little mascot. And whenever you send an email, for years and years, it was just Freddie. And he would put like a little GIF high five. He'd be like, high five, great job. And that is a really good customer insight. It's a really emotional moment when you have to send an email to like maybe tens of thousands of people. And you're like, oh God, did I spell everything right? Is like the subject line right? Is there a mistake somewhere? Like you've taken this huge risk. And emotionally, it's really scary, because there's people that have sent out emails and gotten fired because things are just like off just a little bit. But they had that little GIF come up and give you like a little tiny high five. And they do lots of different ones now, but they're all high fives, like different animals and stuff, and like different context. It's really cute. I really like it. I think that's just a great example of something that's really simple and small, but it's a great example. I don't think anybody would say that's like manipulating a customer, but it is making them feel better emotionally. It is sort of like creating an emotional environment around something
Safe.
that's really scary for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a good example, a small example, but I really like it.
The choice model is done. And somewhere you were talking about, Jen, the choice architecture, because that is another, I think we've not gone in great detail there. Could we take an example there? Because that is another thing which marketers, don't get it right, that how many choices, how many variants, how many flavors, should I go get there? And this is classic. This is classic. I have to give them more variety so that they keep coming back to me, but not so much that they're like, okay, my God, this is too complex for me. I'm going away.
Yeah, I'm out.
You've complicated.
Yeah, no, I totally. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just thinking though, as you were talking, I mean, I think the classic example is sort of like the famous study about choice is the jam experiment, which if anybody who's listening is not familiar, basically you have some people who went out to, I'm just going to summarize this really quickly. So you went to a grocery store and you had jam samples. So I wanted to sell some jam, and they would rotate the displays. So in one rotation, it would have like 25 or so different kinds of jam. You could get a sample and you could buy based off of that sample. Okay. And then they would switch it out and they would have, I think, 3 off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and look at the study, but basically a limited amount of jams. And what they found is that when you had lots of choices, people were attracted to stop and look, but they weren't buying. And when you had fewer choices, fewer people would stop, but more of those people that stopped would actually buy something. So this is like choice paradox. There's a lot of sort of things to unpack there. I mean, I think I'm putting together a course, like a mini course about choice and how to kind of think about it in a customer experience. And it is definitely like a can of worms to talk about choice because, again, I think you just kind of have to look at the results and see how customers are responding to things. And there's definitely like business benefits to limiting choice. So, for years and years, like Apple had very limited choice, and they've started to kind of expand that and kind of move away from that. I think, to their detriment, in my opinion. But if you look at things like IKEA, so like IKEA has limited colors that they offer in each one of their, like, you get like a chest of drawers and it comes, in 3, it's usually some variation of like white, black, or oak. And some of them have more and some of them have less, but they all have those 3 colors. And that allowed them to reduce prices because it gives them production efficiencies. But then also as a customer, imagine an IKEA. It has a lot of choices. It has a lot of different products that I can buy. Like there's selections everywhere and it can feel very overwhelming. But when you dial down on like, okay, I just need a dresser. Like, okay, is this dresser? The last thing you want to do is choose between like 25 different colors. At that point, it's really more mental energy than it's worth. So this goes back to the idea of choice is like, it's a double-edged sword is what I like to say. You have enough choice that attracts people and it's interesting. It's like, oh, okay, great. But then if you have too much choice, it's like overwhelming and I just don't really want to deal with it. So you have to kind of find that balance and look at, kind of the different levels and the different points in the experience when you're asking customers to make a decision. And if you go and look at your experience, people listening or, marketers, whoever it might be, there's probably more points where you're asking people to make decisions than you think there are. If you went through and made like a decision tree and all the points, like, oh, do I get into this line or do I get into that line? There's a bunch of stuff next to the check, the cash register. Do I pick this? Do I pick that? Like, you're probably asking customers to make too many choices. And I think you see businesses sort of go down this scary path of like, they're like, well, we need more choice. We need more options because if we don't have more options, we'll miss out on all these customers. But then that's the trade-off, isn't it? You'll get more people looking, but fewer people buying, which could be good. You get a smaller slice of a pie of a very large market, could be good, or it could be bad. You know what I mean? You get a lot of people that just are looking, wasting your resources, paying for bandwidth, paying for email support, paying for all these other things, and you get fewer people buying proportionally. So again, I think that's just something like you have to consider, you have to experiment with. And it's one of those things that's really difficult because it doesn't just affect marketing or customer experience. It affects operations, it affects finance, it affects everybody. So it's one of those discussions that, one of those difficult discussions you have to have across all the different silos of a business, which, in and of itself is very difficult. But it's one of those that I think is like a very worthy discussion and something that I think most businesses would be, I think well spent to just kind of take some time and consider it and really ask themselves, is there too much choice here? Because usually it's not the other way around. There's very few businesses I've ever been to and said, I wish there were more things here. Oh gosh. Oh no.
This is signature rapid fire. Okay, Jen.
Oh goodness.
It's coming your way.
I'm scared.
Yes, you better be. Let's see how you do. Okay,
ready.
Jen, here it is. Yes, mother's best advice.
Mother's best advice. Listen to yourself.
Alternate profession could have been?
Music producer.
Surprise, nice. What would you do on Mars for fun?
Mars for fun. I'm going to say drive the rover all around Mars.
Okay, I know where it's coming from. Okay, as per your most often used phrase.
Oh, that's a really tough one. My most often used phrase. I'm going to have a blank. I knew it was going to happen. Oh shoot!
Yes! Okay. One thing no one knows about you.
These are really tough questions. One thing no one knows about me.
That's a trap. Quickly, anything.
I really like Taylor Swift. I'm into Taylor Swift.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I'm missing the violin here now. Okay. A book you'd like to gift to all your friends.
Oh, a book called Free Play. But improvisation.
Okay. What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
I would say, don't worry. You'll have a real job eventually. I was a musician for a long time.
Oh my God. Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite childhood memory?
My favorite childhood memory. Ooh, that's a good one. So I with going with my grandparents to go ride horses. We would do that every time we went to visit them. It was very fun. Yes.
Oh, lovely. Okay. If you had to devote the rest of your life to philanthropy, what cause would you choose?
Oh, what cause would I choose? I'm gonna say eliminating poverty. That's a good one.
Okay. Jen, your greatest joy is?
Well, my fiance, obviously.
Okay.
And my dog. She's back there somewhere.
What's a lesson that took you a long time to learn?
Don't care what other people think about you. That goes back to the listen to yourself thing from my mom.
Okay. What's one missed opportunity that you wish you could have a second chance at?
I mean, honestly, my music career. I was a musician for 15 years. I was a classical violist.
Oh my
go back
God.
and take another swing.
It's never too late. Okay, Jan, we are at wrap up. Now, if you could share any online addresses where audiences can reach you, about your book, about your 2 podcasts. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, well, yes. Okay, I'll do the rundown. So on YouTube, it's Grow Like the Greatest. Every other place is choicehacking. So Instagram, choicehacking. We just passed 10,000 followers actually, which is like really exciting. LinkedIn, those are the only 2 socials that I do at the minute. I gave up Twitter. I'm not good at Twitter. So we have LinkedIn, we have Instagram at choicehacking, choicehacking.com. There's a book called Choicehacking. My podcast is called Choicehacking. And then my other podcast that I do show up on occasionally is Everybody Hates Your Brand, which is a marketing podcast that I do with Rob, who is my fiance. So yes, 2 podcasts.
Yay, great.
Yes, I had a great time. This is a great podcast. It's like so well prepared, like great questions. The rapid fire was, I feel like my heart is racing. I feel like that got me. I was on the edge of my seat. But no, I think it's great. Thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen.